Hello, everyone. Hope you're all having a great time at Globe Style Saturday so far. So since opening their firm in 2005, Carrier and Company principals Jesse Carrier and Mara Miller have become known for creating positively chic interiors. So it's no surprise that their new book has that same title. The husband and wife team have worked with the creative world's brightest stars, including women's wear designer Jason Wu, photographer Annie Leibowitz, and Vogue's editor-in-chief Anna Wintour, who also wrote the foreword for the book. Jesse and Mara see both town and country interiors as truly living spaces and combine beautiful objects with pieces that have deep meaning to the occupants, whether they're amassed collections or passed down treasures. It's this belief in a lively mix that has helped place Carrier and Company on Architectural Digest's AD 100, and their work has been featured in Elle Decor, Town and Country, and House Beautiful. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Jesse and Mara to Globe Style Saturday so we can hear more about what makes a space positively chic. So welcome to IDS.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to be in Toronto.
Compared to New York, especially.
Compared to New York, we're lucky to be here.
So what are your impressions of IDS? Is this your first time?
It's our first time to IDS, it's our first time to Toronto, and I have to say we're in love. This is a great show. I think it's, well done. It's reminiscent of our New York interior design show, which is the AD show, which is in a similar setting, and we've seen some tried and true vendors here that we see there, but we also see a host of new product and really exciting furniture and design here.
Excellent, excellent. Have you had much time to explore the city? And
Zero. But now since our flight's been canceled, we'll have a whole extra day. So if there are any tips, any recommendations for a good restaurant tonight, we'll take them.
Yeah, the book signing, if anybody has any recos, definitely pass them along. So I think our audience would like to hear a bit about your background first. What made both of you interested in interior design?
Well, I know that for me, interiors was something I always loved, but I didn't understand that it was a true profession. I thought it was something that kind of ladies did. And I grew up watching This Old House and Home Time, and I loved construction, and I loved job sites. And it was only really after I'd already applied to college that I learned that there were accredited programs and universities that offered it as a degree. So after 2 years of college, I transferred to FIT to finally pursue it.
Yeah, and my story's similar in that Mara grew up closer to New York, and I think she was privy to the New York Times, and I think the real estate section, and there was more understanding of this profession than there was for me. I grew up in a very small town in central New York, much closer to Toronto and outside of Syracuse, and I had no idea of interior design. I actually went to school for fine arts, and after my first year there, realized I would soon starve without some sort of vocation. And so it was really sort of a practical approach for me that I found SUNY FIT, which is where Mara and I met in the interior design program.
Cool. And for me, as a fashion designer, I kind of grew up cutting out pictures from magazines, of fashion editorials that I loved. How did you guys start to foster your passion for design?
I think in a similar way, flipping through Architectural Digest, Elle Decor, all those magazines were huge inspirations for us. And I think also, personally, I think for both of us, we knew early on that our passion was in residential design. At school, there were many options. You could do hospitality design, you could do furniture design. There was sort of a plethora, and I think we always knew that we loved and wanted to do residential design. And I think we looked and were inspired by works of our predecessors, of Mark Hampton, of Bunny Williams, of the sort of great interior designers of our time.
And I would say growing up, my parents were history teachers, and we would always go to house museums and historic estates And for me, that was incredibly exciting. So I can remember wallpapers and carpets and formal gardens. And I don't necessarily remember who the person was in history who owned the house. And that's what I had fallen in love with, kind of knowing that I was more excited and more interested in those kind of moments in time than the 1950s ranch that I was growing up in.
Right, right. And to that end, was there a particular school of style that you were most drawn to, especially when you were studying? And has that changed? Like, were you really into really clean modernism, and now you're kind of swinging the opposite way? Or
Do you know, I find that, I think for Jesse and I, we both really love kind of country house design, kind of an English country house, and more rustic design that tends to be more traditional. But maybe because that was more accessible. Jesse grew up in a rural place, and I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, but it was kind of outside of Bedford, where it's kind of horsey, and it's more of that natural aesthetic. And I think just from our education and then experience, we've learned how to kind of take that foundation and modernize it and be more daring and be more contemporary and be more open.
Right. I was going to say, I think our foundation is really in the traditional vernacular and always has been. And I think depending on the client, depending on the house, we can veer more modern, we can veer more bohemian, but I think our work generally is rooted in tradition.
Right, right. Now, you two are married. You met in school. What are some challenges and some benefits to being married and being partners in life, but also partners in business?
I'll speak to the benefits, just so I don't get in trouble.
Good answer.
I think there's an inherent trust. I do find that clients often find comfort in any partnership when they're coming to an interior designer, so they know that they're getting two pairs of eyes, they're getting two points of view, that it's being vetted. But internally, I think it's great because, generally speaking, I think we have the same point of view. I think we are generally on board. But I do think, Mara is great with details, and I sort of see broader picture, and I think we keep each other in check. There's lots of checks and balances. So I think those are the good parts.
And
that was a setup.
And so let me think about what some of the, I just think that we spend a lot of time together, and it's been, I think, more natural for us. Jesse grew up on a farm with farmer parents, which meant everything was done for the because of the farm. And my parents were both school teachers, so there's a homogeny that we grew up with that was normal. And I think that's also felt very normal for us. But in the business, we also take very different roles behind the scenes. So with clients and on projects and with aesthetics, we share a lot of responsibilities, and we tag team and we collaborate. But behind the scenes, I'd say Jesse probably works more with PR, and I don't even have Instagram on my phone. Apparently we have an account. And I take on some of the drier things. So I do a lot of the business planning, I work with the accountant and the lawyers, and I keep things running. So we get to kind of play, I guess the real benefit of this relationship is we always get to play to our strengths. And we never have to worry about what the other person's doing, because it's not an employee, it's our partner, our business partner and our life partner.
Sure. Well, and I think that speaks to something that Lauren Chan had said about you in our style section last week, just the complementary kind of ideas and sensibilities that you each bring to the table. And also, I'm sure when people are redoing their homes, it can be very tense. Some bones of contention come up. So I'm sure there's a lot of value in having you two as partners, being in that situation, kind of creating a sense of ease as well for people.
It's definitely, it's a very personalized business, and you do get into the very specific details of your clients, and for better for worse, it could be something great about a relocation, a new job, a new child, and it can be devastating. It can be about a house fire, it can be about a divorce, it could be about a death in the family, and our job is to create environments that are healing, are beautiful, that people can feel safe and comfortable in, and whether it's the process or the outcome, I think there's a lot of intricacy there. And yes, I think part of the benefit of being together is that we can relate.
Of course. And I think it also speaks very much to your philosophy of having a comfortable living space. And so I think definitely having your partnership sort of allows for that to probably be a bit more of a natural kind of progression when you're creating those spaces. What have been some of your favorite projects?
Well, here's one now up behind us. This is a project in Southampton we did for a family. It was new construction, and we were very blessed in that it was a great relationship all around. It was, we got along really well with the client. We had a great team. There was a great contractor. There was a great architect. There was a great landscape architect, and everyone had the same sort of goal in mind, and we were all working towards the same ideals. And I think it came out in the end of the project that it really shows very well, and that there was a lot of attention and devotion to the project. This is further of that project.
And I guess for me, a favorite project is really, there's always something about a project that's like the best of that project. Sometimes it's a relationship with the client. Sometimes it's an amazing location. We get an opportunity to work on a lot of weekend homes, and they come with often follies. So there'll be outbuildings that we get to convert, which I think are really, a little more fantastical and a lot more fun, because the clients usually want it to be an experience. So we get to have the enjoyment of a special little guest house or a pavilion for dining, or we just most recently worked on a camp that was purchased, an old 1950s tennis camp, where they wanted to make the field house or the lodge into a field house for entertaining family over the summer. So it gives us opportunities to do these really fun things.
For sure. I just wanted to talk about a space like this for a second, because I'm obviously a fan of color, shockingly. And what I noticed going through the book was that there is so much color and such an interesting use of color, particularly because a lot of the spaces that you do, or at least that I noticed, had very much like a monochromatic root to them. And for someone like me, when I say I love color, I love all kinds of colors in combination, but there's something so appealing about a monochromatic scheme. What are you drawn to in that way?
In a monochromatic scheme, what are we drawn to? I don't know if we're drawn to anything particular about monochromatic, though, now that you mention it, and we're flipping through the slides. There's a blue room, there's a red room. But I think it's really just a love of color. And for us, I think it's, we see textiles, wall coverings, carpets, all these things as a painter would paint. And for us, when we're scheming, it's really about the mix of colors. And as you said, throwing in an odd color every once in a while, just as a juxtaposition, a little punch, I think helps to take the sort of neutrality out of a space and bring it up to a heightened level.
Well, I'd like to say, I think even in a monochromatic scheme, when it's based on a color in general, one thing that Jesse was always very good at, and it's taken me longer to understand, is that we blend colors. So if it's a green scheme, we introduce all different shades of that color. And then it's much more interesting, it's much more forgiving, and it just doesn't feel as, and it can be intense or it can be pale, but it just doesn't have a flatness to it when things are too perfectly matched. When everything matches kind of just so, it can be very strong, but it's also very tight. And you can sense that, it feels that way. And I think that's one thing we try to achieve, is that kind of blending, painterly looseness.
Right. And how difficult is it for you sometimes to coax people into use of color, because, you know, it's not for everybody. Not everybody likes a lot of grand, colorful schemes. So how do you kind of...
You know, I think part of our process with all of our clients is really sort of getting to know them first and understanding what their tolerances are. And I think a lot of people respond to our work because it is colorful, and so we'll oftentimes get clients who are interested in pursuing some color. But those who are a little shy, for example, here's a largely neutral room, but we can add small pops of color through accents, accessories, pillows, things that aren't overwhelming, that if ultimately they don't care for them, it's not a huge upset. We can simply replace those small details.
And I would say further that if a client has no interest in color, we have no agenda. If we've done one home where it was only tones of white and gray, and that was it. That was all that was allowed. And
if it was blue-gray was too colorful,
blue-gray.
I mean, it had to be...
Amazing. So, Anna Wintour wrote the foreword for your book, and it's very interesting to me because in it she talks about your sort of idea of perfection and how it's not really possible to achieve perfection, which is unusual because when I think of somebody and the word perfection, my mind goes automatically to Anna Wintour. So I thought it was very interesting that she could speak to that. Can you kind of speak a bit more to that idea of perfection sort of being something that, not that you work around, but something that, you have to...
I think it's different than not being able to achieve perfection. I think, at least I've seen a lot of very perfectly decorated houses, and I think what she's speaking to is that a house doesn't need to be or shouldn't be perfect, that there should be room for lifestyle, for you to personalize it and to live unself-consciously in a space, and in a space that's forgiving for how you live. I think we've all heard of those rooms that only get used on certain holidays, and otherwise you don't go in that space because it's perfect. And I think what we're about is creating spaces that you use all the time, that there's not, there should never be a space that you can't use because it's perfect, that it should be kid-friendly, pet-friendly, life-friendly, that it's about, not living to other people's standards, but just living to your own.
Sure. And that brings me to something else in the book that you talk about, sort of just having this idea of a very comfortable space to live in, a place to sit down and take off your boots, and that kind of thing. Do you think that that's a notion that's sort of getting lost in interior design, or?
Jesse and I were talking a little bit about that just the other day, and because one thing that's being kind of brought up since we published the book is just that idea of comfort. And I think that a lot of times what you see in decorating has like two extremes, where either it's kind of rigorous and rigid, and you could see a scuff on the floor, you can see a fingerprint on the coffee table, or it's like a lazy boy recliner. Like when you think of comfort, it goes completely non-aesthetic direction. And one thing we struggle to achieve is to make sure that a home can look beautiful, look stylish, but still, work if you're hosting a kid's birthday party or work if you're hosting a corporate cocktail party. That it has to be able to play to both, to real life. And in another way, it also has to play to, Jesse mentioned it earlier, like being unself-conscious, that the home has to be right for you. Otherwise, it's like you're living in a stage set. And we've gone into homes where if you pick up, who are beautifully decorated, and if you pick up an item on the coffee table, there was a little dot on the coffee table so that they knew where to put the piece back. And that means you're not living authentically. You're not living in your home because you're so concerned about making sure.
But those are the best clients. They don't change a thing. When you walk back into a house 5 years later and everything looks just as you left it, you get a good grade.
And so working in both a city interior and a country interior, as you do, to me it kind of seems like, well, that would always kind of maybe be the case in a country home, and it would be more of a challenge to achieve something like that in a city dwelling. Is that the case, or is it always kind of a bit of a challenge?
Comfort?
Yeah.
I don't think it should be. I mean, I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's a choice, really, of lifestyle, and I think it's about reassuring clients that it's okay to be comfortable. You don't have to. It doesn't have to measure up to your neighbors or your friends' expectations. That you have to take ownership for this home, and that it's okay to be comfortable.
Well, I think there's also a little reality check where if you're going to be using, in New York City, space is a premium, so you're living more in the spaces that you have. You don't have the luxury of having maybe a family room or a rec room. Everything might be happening, over and over again in these spaces. So it might mean you can't buy and use an antique bergère because somebody might crack the arms off it when they, push real hard to sit up. So I think there's just a little bit of
balance,
sensitivity to that, but otherwise you can have a very comfortable couch in a mohair upholstery in the city that's going to be durable and kind of washable, and it's just kind of making choices that are right for them.
Sure. And also, too, you talk about how you like to make sure that a person's artwork or collections that they have are very important within this space. Does that sometimes pose a challenge? Like, do you ever sometimes get a client who has something that,
It's definitely challenging, and I think it's rare that we get a client who comes with a blank slate. Occasionally it happens, but most often clients come with an assortment of artwork or maybe some family heirlooms or something from a previous apartment. And we sort of appreciate that and welcome that, because I think it's a nice starting point in a project to know here are the things that we love that we want to bring with us, and I think it gives us a springboard to move forward. And sometimes there are things that we don't necessarily love or wouldn't have chosen ourselves, but we appreciate that maybe it has some sort of heirloom or family sentimentality, and we can maybe we can recover it, or we can suggest that we refinish it, or we can repurpose it in a way that maybe is unexpected, or place it in a room that's interesting. And I think there are certainly challenges, but we promote that. I think it makes it really a personalized space, which is what ultimately we set out to do.
Of course. Did you have anything to add, or?
Clients bring things. I was also saying we also will suggest to reframe a lot of artwork. A lot of times changing the frame can really help a piece blend in a new environment. And I think we also do test them to see how important a piece is.
For example, you see that little table between the chairs? Don't love them, but they were a very special table that the clients bought during their honeymoon, and it had some sentimental value, and so we had to sort of work it into the scheme. And so, it doesn't become the focal point of the room necessarily, but I think there are ways to sort of pay tribute to, clients' wishes and
Of course.
individual things.
So, where do you go for inspiration? How do you find inspiration? I know in the book you had a space that was inspired by Slim Aaron's photography.
We go to Toronto.
Beautiful. Excellent.
I have to say we're creatures of habit. I think we subscribe to all the magazines. We just pour over imagery. Whether it's printed or online. We're constantly just. There's not any actual place we go. I mean, sure, we like to go antiquing. There's different towns we like to go through and hope we find something. But ultimately, it's really just through books, magazines, online resources that we find inspiration. We find inspiration in our clients and in their lifestyles. We find inspiration in our colleagues' work that we admire and follow. So there's always sort of a constant flow of inspiration.
I would say there's a little bit of kind of purity in residential that we like seeing. It's easy. We like seeing homes. We like seeing antiques. We like, being in New York, we have so many auction houses to be able to go and kind of touch and manhandle all these different museum quality pieces is really exciting. And that for me, sometimes it's a commercial space, a hospitality space that is it's like a more exciting version of residential. So it's a way to translate, it gets me thinking, because I could go to Saint-Tropez, I could go to St. Bart's. That's not going to help a client with an apartment on the Upper West Side. Even so, I'd love to do that, but just kind of seeing bigger statements sometimes helps to reimagine them for a residence.
Right. And do you catalog them in any way? Like, I know for a lot of us it's Pinterest, but even in your phone or in a notebook, or does it all kind of live in your head?
We have the rattiest collection of binders with tear sheets that, while we're scheming, I'll sort of pull them out and look them over. It's really terrible. We need somebody to do that.
But no, we have secret Pinterest boards so that the office can kind of share, and that we can kind of keep the aesthetic of the office kind of on target.
Right. And do you think something like Pinterest has sort of enlivened people's interest in interiors? Do you notice more conversations about it? Are more people?
I think it's a great tool, and I think it's very useful for clients who.
Too useful for some clients? Or
it can be a little paralyzing, for sure. But what I've noticed in using it is that it becomes a little stagnant. I feel like you see the same imagery posted and reposted, and there's not a lot of variety. And I think it's sometimes good to go back to some of the old magazines and books and see, just see some pictures that you haven't seen in the last couple of months. I do find it becomes a little bit repetitive, perhaps, and maybe in some, as vast as it is, it's a bit limiting.
And it is true. I actually forgot about it, but we also have collections of old architectural digests and old house and gardens, and to kind of get to go back through those and see what's still beautiful 20 years later or 30 years later
really
is very
influence.
telling, because it shows you what was tasteful and what was stylish but is still considered stylish. So it kind of helps clear your mind for how to maneuver through trends and how to see what has real staying power.
Sure. Well, and that was a question I wanted to ask, is for our audience, for example, how do you recommend them navigating between what's trendy and sort of where their instincts take them? How much of it is a balance for you in work? How many of your clients come to you saying, well, this I saw in this magazine and I want this because it's the new thing, it's pink, it's marble, it's whatever's on Vogue, versus their own inclinations already?
I think it's a balance. I think that trends. I think you can be too trendy. I think for us, I think if anyone were to ask what's your style, I would say we try to achieve a timeless style. But I think that within that style, you can add trendy elements that you can sort of change out with when that trend becomes passé. To advise anyone how to sort of maneuver through what's trendy and what's sort of a personal appeal, I think you should always go with your gut, and I think take the trends lightly and not really by hook, line, and sinker into them. I think it's dangerous, and it can look dated really quickly.
Sure. Is that something that within the interior design community, is that sort of a pressure to keep pursuing trends, or maybe not for your?
It's a balance, because for a lot of clients they want the safety. I feel like they come to us at least because they want the safety of kind of this lovely kind of timeless home, but they also want to seem smart and current. So we kind of discuss where we can make those statements, but we also try to pick trends that we think are really enduring. And one thing that I think has been nice to see, even here at this show, is that you can see what was a trend, like the live edge wood. That was a trend a couple of years ago, which now has really been incorporated into an aesthetic. It's just a different option in modernism. So it's exceeded a trend, and now it has become a design statement. And so we think we make good choices in that way, where we can kind of see what has staying power and what isn't going, like a starburst light fixture, all different varieties, or these kind of kinetic connected pieces. They were a trend that is enduring. So now they are
mainstream.
They're
right? They've sort of
contemporary
become
classic.
mainstream, and I would I would suggest, trends, I think where you really get into trouble with trends is when you incorporate them into your architecture. So if you're if you're designing a kitchen, that's not something you're going to want to redo in a couple of years when the trend of whatever, tile that you put in your backsplash or countertop, it's like those are areas, bathrooms, kitchens where you want to be timeless, and you want to make sure that those are things that will weather the course. And yeah, sort of our advice would be to keep the trends limited to, a paint color, something that's easy to change, some accessories, a lamp, whatever, things that you're not completely controlled by.
Sure. Well, and I think that one of the ways you're successful at kind of negotiating that is through what you call the masterful mix, and just kind of combining. You can see here all these different elements, some a little more boho, some a little more modern. And this is definitely, I think, something that a lot of people looking at that picture would probably think, I could never put that combination of things together. So how do you approach that with your clients? How do you start, telling them it's okay to have a very kind of modern, sleek chair with a leather upholstered chair side by side? Because I think it's not easy to sort of see all those separate entities and think that they can be combined so wonderfully.
It's not. It's certainly not overnight, and it's not something that just assembles and gels immediately. It sort of comes out of the process of first putting together a plan and sort of defining the sort of foundations of a space. What's the sofa form? What are the complementary chair forms? And then we'll delve into, is this an opportunity to do some sort of a live edge or organic coffee table versus a rectangle? And we sort of it's a layering effect, and it ends up the result is a layered look, but the process is actually a very layered process where we just integrate and sort of propose things along the way. And it's personal too. I think some clients respond to only sort of rectilinear. They like things to be very clean. Other people have more of a bandwidth to be more playful or organic. And I think those sort of details in that mix sort of reflect ultimately the homeowner and the client. But it's a very organic process of assembling something that's a mix. And I think it's something we really strive to do for any project, is to create something that seems tailored is a word, but something that we've put together, and that it ultimately will look like the homeowner has collected these things, that it's been over time, that it's not an instant decorated room. It's sort of anti-decorating in a way that it feels that it's been there for a long time, or that it's been collected over time.
Sure.
I know. I have to say, I think the masterful mix is something we have worked years to kind of be able to do, that I don't even know really how to describe it, because it's just visual, and we kind of know where we can push and when we push too far, and why a mix is working. But I do think it's kind of just about checking for balances, whether you've got something that's sleek combining with something that's more rugged. A lot of times we'll blend things that I'm doing a terrible job answering this question, but that it's really about a very careful balance, and that you can do it at home. I would say do it with image boards or Pinterest, where basically give yourself a visual check. We make little schematics in the office, so that every time we add a piece to a room, we add it to this little 11 by 17 paper with a little floor plan. And then as we're shopping, we can make the room really interesting, because we just bring that item to that schematic, and we know that it looks great and enhances the room, or it looks really distracting. So it's just kind of a good, even for us, a good gauge of that's interesting, but it's too weird. It's taking it in the wrong direction. So I think you don't have to do it right in the store. You have to kind of just work on it at home.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, I think the challenge in answering that question just goes to show how, it is something that evolves. It's not just something that you can innately necessarily have come to you. Now, in a space, so this is a very iconic space. In a space where perhaps, you were talking about a client who might have a lot of collections or collectibles, something like, the office at Vogue. When I think of something like that, or I look at a picture like this, it's very pared down to me. It's not as eclectic as some of the other spaces in your book. And I think paring down was kind of a big sort of buzzy idea in 2015 and something that you talk about in the book. How does that process go when you're discussing with clients? How do you kind of ease them into editing if it's something that they might not necessarily be super into as an idea right off the bat?
I don't think we ease them into it. I think we sort of come to them saying, we will ruthlessly edit your stuff, and we're not going, we'll tell you if it doesn't work. We don't really cushion the blow. And I think it's really the only way. I mean, why beat around the bush? Get rid of it.
Yeah, but I also think clients come to us because there's something appealing about our portfolio, even if it's not the house that they want, and that thing that's consistent in the portfolio is a bit of lightness, is a bit, even when there's intense color, we're very conscientious of making controlled compositions so that there's a lot of open space. On a floor plan, there's a lot of flow, so that you can have a traditional room with pretty details, but it still feels kind of fresh. And I don't think it hasn't been a hard thing for us to do for the most part, because for a kind of current younger clients, it's what they find appealing. It's what lets them do maybe more traditional design, because it still feels like it's a modern home for a young family. We get clients where we say, well, we want it to make sure it's real for a young family, and I think that's really what it means, that it's not overstuffed.
Right. And is it something that you yourselves have difficulty doing, or are you equally as ruthless?
At home?
Yeah, with your own space.
Well,
It's very easy to say. I used to do personal shopping, and I'd be like, you don't need this, you don't need this. But if somebody came into my closet, I'd be like, get out of
true.
here.
That's why you may not see any images of our apartment or our house up here behind us, because we are a bit of a hoarder. But I think at the same time, in our apartment in New York, it's a small space. We have 2 children, and you have to make some sacrifices to make life convenient and livable. So, and back to your point before, it's not perfect. It just, you have to make it work. But it has to be stylish, or at least you'd hope it to be.
I feel like I would disagree with you, Jesse, because on a good day, our home does look kind of clean and edited. And we are a firm believer in lots of storage, smart storage, and like really good closets. But like our living room has every single piece. We have no side tables. Every piece of furniture stores something. So we have an armoire that has games and dress-up clothes and a printer. We have chests of drawers next to the sofa that store dress-up accessories and games and puzzles. Dolls are in baskets under the coffee table. We have a mirrored piece that holds a keyboard and art supplies. So when everything's put away, it looks like a grown-up space. We have a chaise lounge and a velvet sofa, and everything looks kind of right. And when the kids are playing, it's insanity. But it can all go away into a real place. And I feel like we've hit a tipping point now as the kids have grown, that everything they have got bigger, and now we basically can't do what we do. There's no more furniture we can put in that room.
Right.
So now we have to get a bigger apartment.
Right. Naturally. How has having children sort of informed or maybe changed your philosophy and your approach to design, if at all? Or
It's definitely made it more realistic, because I found that when we had children, the children didn't make the house messy, but for the first time we had people in the house all the time, where we used to go to work in the morning and come home and maybe the cat had done something naughty, but otherwise everything was perfectly intact. And it was the first time everything got constant use, constant abuse, never mind what children naturally do.
Right.
So I think it's taught us to figure out how to make things much more hardworking, because we saw things wear out, saw things get stained. We we now know how to really maneuver and maintain.
Right, right. So in terms of, just kind of, like, what is one decor piece that you think everybody should own? If it's something that you have, that you love, or something that you always love adding to a space?
An easy decor piece, I think
that's so personal. I think, I love pottery. We have clients who love pottery. I think that's an easy thing. But I think it has to be something that you inherently love, whether it's artwork, pottery, glassware. I don't know. It's a decorative piece. I don't know.
I
What
would
do you?
say a mirror or pair of mirrors can always.
I've noticed a lot of mirrors in the book, so that, to me, that was kind of what I was expecting you to say.
You were leading.
Which I don't hate, so,
Because I think you can put a mirror over a console, over a pair of bedside tables, over a bed. I think that it's an easy piece. It can go in a guest bedroom. It can go in a hallway. It can have a life of its own.
Right, right. Now, what would be your dream project?
You've answered this before. I'll let you go.
I would love to do like a private club or a boutique hotel, something that is like very residentially inspired, but gets to have kind of larger moments where every room is the guest powder room and the guest bedroom and the fancy living room. Like, I think that would be a lot of fun.
Cool. Excellent. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I'm sure there's probably some people in the audience who have some questions for you. So we have a microphone at your disposal. Does anybody? I know nobody likes to go first, but.
I noticed a lot of pieces that look to be antique or vintage. When you're shopping for all of that stuff, how do you manage that? Are you buying things as you see them and collecting them and warehousing them, or are you only buying specifically for one project? And then also to that same question, does your own home become like this constant turnover of different things you find that you love, or are you very sort of settled in your house designed as it is?
I would say if I had my way, I would be buying and collecting things, but somebody put the stop on that. So we only buy for specific reasons, for specific projects. And, I think we always keep our eye on the prize, and in terms of, we're always reviewing catalogs for auction sales and first dibs and whatever other resources we control for great antiques. And, we'll save things even if we don't have an absolute need for them, but we'll have them as a reference to look back to. But it's generally site-specific. And that's part of the layering process or the design process, where once we have the foundations laid and we know what the custom upholstery is, what the rugs are, what the walls are, we'll start to think about layering and where and what antique pieces should we fit in. And that's something we'll bring to the client and say, here's a variety of break fronts. We would love to have an antique side table here. Here are some options. And we'll present the, 2 or 3 best options.
And, I came from offices that did purchase and collect and warehouse their own items. And I feel like, that I don't know if they ever did the math to see how much it was costing them. Like, they would remember what they bought it at the Paris flea market, but they never added in the cost of, like, the warehouse manager, the warehouse, the insurance, the refinishing. So they thought they were making a lot of money when they sold the piece, but I'm not quite sure they did. And I also like the freedom to kind of find exactly what's right for a client as we need it. But with that said, because we're always shopping and always looking, we know when there's something that's amazing, or we know that that's something that's undervalued. And so sometimes we do buy off the cuff just because we can't help ourselves, but we're trying not to do that because we're not antique dealers. So.
Sure, right, because you need the bigger apartment already. So it's like, yeah. Well, but that's the thing kind of with vintage and antiques. I wear a lot of vintage clothing, so sometimes I'm like, well, what if I never see it again? So you have that impulse and that inclination, but yeah.
I've been very excited to see how you've used your wall space for artwork. I live in a house with very little wall space, and I'm always upset that I can't hang my artwork, but I've seen some interesting uses. One was in the den with the bookcases. And there was another very large painting, again, in a wall of bookshelves. So that's very inspiring. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, I think that there's an image of it there, too. And I think that's often a very hard sell, especially for this client who had this amazing collection of travel books that he had brought in. And then I said, well, great, let's hang this piece of artwork over your collection of very expensive books. And he sort of had a little moment there, but he trusted us, and there's another example. And I think it just, that's an example of adding a little bit of whimsy to a space, something that's a little unexpected that I think gives a lot of character, with very little effort.
I know, and also we also do a lot of salon-style hanging, where we stack pieces on top of each other. In our own apartment, we actually have gallery hooks so that we can kind of move things around and not worry about the wallpaper. So I think there is a way you can kind of layer things in or cluster them where they kind of have a life of their own as well as being your artwork.
Very quiet out there.
Just taking it all in.
Hi. I've noticed how spectacularly styled your photographs are. Everything looks perfect, from the flowers to the accessories to the sun to the glasses on the books. When you do a photo shoot of your work, do you do the flowers yourselves and the styling yourselves? Do you have people that assist? Is your photographer very involved in that? I guess it's an open question that way.
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, some of this is sort of homemade, and some of it, there are certain images here that were from editorial photo shoots where they bring in a stylist and and work with professionals. But and some of them are really, some of them are authentic sort of client arrangements that actually live with flowers every day and have cutting gardens and are sort of semi-professional florists themselves. So I would say it's a mix. But thank you for noticing.
Hi. So it's not a question, but it's a restaurant recommendation for Toronto. You
thank
have
you.
to try Biblos on Duncan Street. It's amazing. Yes, I was just there recently and it's great.
Thank
so
you.
enjoy Toronto.
Thank you.
It is great. That's a good reco. Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesse and Mara, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your time in Toronto. I'm sure you're really desperate to get back to the blizzard, but we're happy to have you and enjoying our sunshine.
Happy to be here. And if you liked what you saw up on the boards behind us, there are books here for purchase at Swipe. Is that right? At the book.
Yeah, you can get your book
so
signed.
make sure you walk out that way.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful book. It's very, very inspiring, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.